classmates who have children at the college. I have several classmates whose children were just admitted to the college. Maybe they're in the chat tonight. And I've been in and around the Dartmouth community off and on for since the fall of 1985. So I'm looking forward to answering your questions. John?
I'm John Carey. Excuse me. I'm a professor of government. I've been at Dartmouth for 9 years now. And I teach classes in comparative politics. I teach classes, I'm teaching a big introductory class right now called Politics of the World, which I really enjoy. It has a lot of freshmen in it. And I'm also the parent of a freshman who's not in that class, but a freshman, so that's a class of 15, as they call themselves at Dartmouth, who grew up here in Hanover and went to Hanover High School and wanted to stick around and is at Dartmouth now.
Great, so just keep posting your questions in the chat. We'll be answering them, and then also some student interns will be answering those, actually typing them into the chat as well. So the first question is from a parent who heard that people are hazed into happiness. I think this is a quote from the Rolling Stone article that came out recently, that they're hazed into happiness on DOC trips. So what is the college doing to prevent being hazed into happiness?
So maybe a little context for what the DOC trips are is a good place to start, and then maybe Amanda, you can talk a little bit about your experience with it. So Dartmouth, as is the case for lots of colleges, Dartmouth introduces students to the community before their freshman year by sponsoring a whole range of different outdoor trips at every level of experience that you can imagine. There are hiking trips and kayaking trips, and there are trips where you really don't have to do much of anything and you can just do nature photography. And about 95 to 97% of each entering class participates in a trip. And the reference, Hazed into Happiness, is from an article in Rolling Stone that came out last week. And part of what happens when students finish the trip is they end up at the Moosilauke Ravine Lodge with a group of students who do all sorts of great team building activities. There's singing, there's dancing, there's a lot of stuff. And part of that is that people read from Green Eggs and Ham. Dr. Seuss is a Dartmouth alum. So I don't think folks in this community, it's that comment has actually prompted really good conversation. Amanda and I were with a group of 80 students last week where we were talking about that. And I think students come out of first year trips with this real sense of connection to the college. They know a small group of students really well before they come here, before they get onto campus. They know a bigger group of students who are part of 10 group trips before they get onto campus. So you have this familiar set of faces before orientation ever starts, and a chance to really sort of know the community before you get to know the campus. I don't know that, what you'd add to that in terms of your experience with first year trips, your own kind of trip. And
yeah, I think DOC trips definitely one of the objects of, the purposes of the trips is that we do want you to be happy. We want you to be excited to be at Dartmouth, but no one's going to force you to be happy, I don't think. I personally had a great experience on my DOC trip. I did a trail work trip, which I had never done any. I've been hiking a lot before coming to college, but I'd never done any trail work, so that was something new for me. Made friends with my trippies, got to hang out at the lodge, got to hang out outdoors before coming to Dartmouth, which was really great. And my trip leader actually was a senior woman that year. One of my two trip leaders, there's always one guy and one of my two trip leaders, there's always one guy leading the trip together. And my female trip leader was a senior. She basically became my mom at school for the first year. I went to her with any questions I had. We did Pie Tuesdays as a trip, like all through fall and winter terms of my freshman year, where she would bake a pie every Monday night and bring it to us on Tuesday, and we would all hang out in Collis, the student center, and eat it. So it's the purpose of the trips are to welcome people to campus, and usually part of being welcomed is feeling happy. So I think maybe that's where that comes from. But I personally had an awesome experience. So the second question is, could my child come sit in the classroom for one or two lectures?
Short answer is absolutely. We'll be hosting for regularly hosting students. We'll be hosting for regularly hosting students will be 21st. In addition to regular class visits, there'll be 5 or 6 big lectures, not big in size, but lectures that students can go to and parents can go to during that day so that we can take some of the pressure off the regular class schedule. And if students visit at other times of the month, they can come and sit in on classes. You've probably had folks coming into your classes.
Yeah, I have students come regularly this time of year when they're when they're looking at Dimensions Weekend. We go out of our way to welcome the students that are on campus for that Friday for Dimensions. But on any given lecture day during this period of the year. A lot of times I'll have a student come up at the beginning of class and just say, hey, I've been admitted, I'm visiting campus today, I'm not going to be here on Dimensions, is it okay if I sit in? And that's great. We love to see the admitted students. So.
Great. And then our next question from Minnie Chow 1. What is the placement rate for pre-med to medical schools?
So there are a couple different ways to look at the number, but generally what the folks who advise pre-med students tell us is in any given year about 90% of the students who apply to medical school from Dartmouth are admitted, so that's a great, very high acceptance rate. It puts us among the top handful of schools in the country. Truth in advertising, the most highly selective schools in the country, like Dartmouth, have very high placement rates into medical schools. So what Lee Witters, who's the faculty advisor who leads up all the advising for medical school, tells students is, if you want to go to medical school from Dartmouth, you'll be able to. And the key to having success with that is following the advice of advisors, getting to know faculty members well, which you can do here easily, and students who plan ahead end up with good choices at the end. And I think in the chat, probably folks can post some links to the Nathan Smith Society, but if you visit campus or come to Dimensions, we'll also have lots of resources for connecting with folks around pre-med. And even, you have students majoring in government who are pre-med, and
oh, sure.
There's a wide range of paths you can take to that result.
Great. And then our next question, what is the process for deferring admission in order to take a gap year? I think this is for Dan as well.
Yeah, so I'm getting a lot of questions here, and we're going to distribute them around. If you contact the admissions office and let us know you want to take a gap year, the key is to email the office. We'll just review that to make sure you've got some kind of plan. If you let us know by June 1, then we'll approve your deferral. There's no extra deposit, no extra hoops to jump through. You email admissions.application or admissions.processing, any one of our email addresses, and we'll get it to the right person.
And another quick question, do a lot of students travel to Dimensions on their own?
They do, and we're here to welcome students. We've got a lot of good information up on the Dimensions website about how to make arrangements and how to make sure that everything's fine. And I would say it's a pretty even mix of students who come with their parents and students who come on their own, so no worries about coming on your own.
Great, and now we have a question for Professor Carey. What were you most anxious before your son started at Dartmouth?
Well, because we are here, we live here in Hanover, and I teach here in Hanover, because it's a pretty small town, I guess my biggest anxiety was whether or not the place was going to be big enough for my son to find his own community, his own place on campus. And on the one hand, it's not as though I want to lose track of him completely, but I want the place to be big enough for him to find a space there that's his own, and he has. And I guess that would be the concern of any parent, whether they were living in Hanover or living in Chicago or Los Angeles. And it's one thing I like about Dartmouth is the size. It's a big enough campus that there are a lot of different communities, and there's say even in a small town like Hanover, my son can find a place where he's really got his own spot in Dartmouth, and so do I, and we can coexist. But I think it's also a small enough place that people are able, even in their freshman year, to find a home, find a lot of familiar faces, partly because of the trips, and partly because a lot of the hard work that our College Dean's office does. So it's worked out so far, so good.
Okay, and as a tour guide, I get a lot of questions about, how cold is it in the winter? But I can say I've never gotten this weather question before. How muddy does it get in the spring?
Pretty muddy. Pretty muddy in the spring.
Although this year it isn't bad because we didn't really have a very snowy winter.
Right.
So far we haven't really seen a lot of mud season. But last year we were pretty.
But Amanda has a great pair of, you wear those big
rain boots?
Rain boots, right? And it's definitely a fashion statement at Dartmouth in the spring to wear those rain boots around for a couple weeks.
Now we have a question from Kevin 1. Does a student feel any pressure to join the Greek system? And another related question from AMC Jin. What percentage of freshmen men pledge a fraternity, and are the fraternities residential? So I don't know who wants to take this. I mean, I can talk from the student perspective.
Yeah, so let me just so the second half of the question about the percentage of students belonging, and Dartmouth's a little different, so let me give the briefest definition I can and then let Amanda talk about kind of the pressure and the dynamics. And students at Dartmouth don't join a Greek organization until their sophomore year. So you rush or join a house sophomore fall, sophomore winter, sophomore spring. And for upper class students, it's about, I don't know the exact percentages, but I think it's probably about 55, 60% of women. It's a little higher for men, about 60% of men who join houses. Am I off? A little higher than that for men. Okay. And then, so once students join the houses, the fraternities and sororities are residential, but the other dynamic that's a little different at Dartmouth, the other parents who've been to other schools, most students who belong to the houses don't actually live in the houses. So it's a much different dynamic. You don't join till sophomore year. Most students who belong to the houses don't live in the houses. The nature of the affiliation is just different than it is in other places. And one of the anecdotes I used to describe that is that it's not unusual to get to senior year. A couple years ago, we had an intern working in the office who was a senior. He belonged to a house. He lived in an apartment on campus with 4 other friends. In that 5-person group, he belonged to one house, 2 other guys belonged to another house, and the other 2 guys didn't belong to houses at all. And those 5 guys were really close friends. And that nobody at Dartmouth would think that that's strange. So really big part of life, very vibrant and active, but not quite as all-encompassing as on other campuses that I've visited and that I've been on.
Yeah, I think as to the student exposure, I mean, what's nice, so the question of how many, what percentage of freshmen men are affiliated, like 0%, which is really nice. You have that whole year, which was really important for me to figure out my place on campus and figure out, if I wanted to join. I actually am unaffiliated. I never rushed at all. So there's obviously not too much pressure to join, as I didn't feel pressured, but I definitely think, your sophomore fall, you're transitioning from freshman year. There are a lot of people who are rushing. It's definitely a big topic on campus. So it is, an important decision, I think, for a lot of people, although it also seems, as I'm getting older, that, it seems like a big deal sophomore year, and then no one really, after sophomore fall, when it is that first term of, oh, are you rushing, are you not? It's there are some friends of mine who are still technically affiliated with their houses, but really are there maybe once a term. There are other people who are very involved. I am unaffiliated, but I still hang out at Greek houses, maybe once every couple of weeks. And then there's other people who are unaffiliated and have never been to a Greek house at all. So I think it really is just sort of the system of it is a large part of campus life for a fair amount of people. There are a majority of students who are affiliated, but it's not this sort of thing where, coming from the South, a lot of the schools that my friends looked at were either you are Greek or you're not, and that is your network or it is not. Right. And that's just absolutely not the way it is at Dartmouth. I think the apartment example is very key. I mean, my sophomore year, my sophomore fall, before we rushed, I was living with a girl who joined a sorority, and then we both left for the winter, and when we came back, I lived in a triple with her and another girl from her sorority, who actually ended up becoming one of my best friends, and now I'm living with the other girl that I met through her sorority. It's not my sorority. You make those connections all the time, whether you're affiliated or not, which I think is a really nice part of campus life. So, next question from SAR: to what extent does the D plan affect campus intimacy? I think maybe we're talking about the intimate feel of campus, maybe. So,
who wants to jump in? All right, I'll jump in. So. And I think probably Amanda's the best source for this, and talking to current students. So I've been at Dartmouth a really long time. And one of the things that's always been true since I was a student here and all through the time I worked here, I left here for about 7 years and came back. One of the things that's always been true here is that you get to your senior year as a student at Dartmouth, and you can't say that you know everyone on campus. You don't know everyone in your class. As Professor Carey said, the campus is big enough that you sort of find your own space. But one of the things that happens when you get to senior year is that you know this huge range of people in your class from across different majors, people who belong to different houses, people who are involved in different parts of the community. And a lot of that is driven by the D plan at Dartmouth. You get to your sophomore year, friends of yours are off doing an internship, they're off doing a study abroad program, they come back in the winter from wherever they've come, and they've made these connections with people you didn't know very well. And then you go off and do an internship, or you go off and do a language study abroad program, and come back. You come back together as a class sophomore summer, and you all of a sudden look around at your group of friends and find, oh my gosh, I didn't actually know her 6 months ago, but she traveled with my friend through Asia, and now she's part of this network of friends that I have. So part of what happens with the D plan is it kind of spreads out your network of people you're affiliated with and you have acquaintances with because they've connected with your friends in all this different way. It's interesting.
Cool. I actually have studied abroad twice. I went to Mexico on a language study abroad my sophomore winter, and then this past fall, my junior fall. I was in South Africa and Namibia with our environmental studies department. So that was definitely, like a lot, a good amount of terms abroad. And then actually, a lot of my friends were off junior winter, so or even maybe 14. So I became friends with last year. They weren't here for my sophomore summer, obviously. Then I was going in the fall, and then they were doing their own language study abroad in the winter. So that's a 9-month chunk, which definitely one of my best friends was actually, we haven't seen each other for 9 months, but in this age you have Skype, you've got everything. Like, it's so easy to keep in touch with people. I mean, even though I was in South Africa and Namibia, and we were in the bush a lot of the time, I didn't really have internet, but I still was able to keep in touch with people. And then it just makes, I think what was really great was my winter, I got to spend a lot of time meeting the 15s. As I mentioned, I'm on the Ultimate Frisbee team, so I was meeting all of our new freshmen that I hadn't met in the fall. And now that all my friends are back for the spring, it just made the reunion that much better. I think it's a great chance to meet new people, but you still keep in touch with the friends that you really care about even when you're gone. So just a reminder, feel free to post questions on the chat for us to answer live. We've got Professor Carey, who's a great resource, and Dan as well. And the next question is, what international study options are there? So I already touched on that a little bit with my experience, but there's a ton of different options. I don't know. I mean, I can talk about it, or one of you.
I want to give background, and then do you want to talk a little bit about, it's not international, but the government program, just how that works in terms of, and you guys have two.
Yeah,
that's
we
right.
actually have two study programs off campus too. So
yeah,
you want to start?
Sure. So there's basically 3 options for Dartmouth students to study abroad. One is the language study abroad, which I did my sophomore winter. And these, basically every single language department on campus offers at least one, if not 2 or 3, and they're offered pretty much every term. You can go to Japan, to China, to Argentina, to Spain, France, pretty much wherever you want. And basically those, you're with Dartmouth students, a Dartmouth professor, and you're going to really get immersed in the language. All of your classes are in that language. So in Mexico, I took Spanish 3, which was my grammar class to fulfill my language requirement, and then I also took Mexican history and Mexican literature. 2 classes were with local professors, and one was with the Dartmouth professor that came with us, and then I lived in a homestay family. And that's kind of the way that most of the programs are structured, with the Dartmouth professor and the local professors, the homestays. There's also the foreign study program, or the FSP option, and this is offered by virtually every department on campus. Between the FSPs and the LSAs, we have 54 Dartmouth-specific study abroad programs. And so these are, again, you're going with a group of Dartmouth students, you're going abroad and being in those classes. But these are to really immerse yourself, not necessarily in a language, but just in that subject area. So as I mentioned, the environmental studies program that I was on goes to South Africa and Namibia, and we traveled all around. We were moving around every 3 or 4 days. Most of them are more traditional classroom experiences. But the biology department goes to Costa Rica, anthropology goes to New Zealand, and then the government department has a couple different programs, actually, if you want to talk about those.
Yeah, sure. So we have 2 what are called FSPs, foreign study programs, although only one of ours is actually foreign. So I'll start with that one. We have one program that goes to London, and the students go and they actually enroll in the London School of Economics for a semester. One member of our department goes each year with the group. So 15, 16, 17 Dartmouth students go. And what they do is they take 2 classes with LSE students and LSE professors, and they enroll in those classes, and then they go to the normal lecture sessions, and then once a week they have a special breakout session with just the Dartmouth students and the LSE professor, so in a seminar style, and that gives them a little more contact with the LSE faculty. And then the 3rd class they have is taught by the Dartmouth faculty member who accompanies them there. And the students just love that program. There's always so many more that want to go than we can actually accommodate, but I guess that's a good sign because it's a really, when I talk to students who are graduating, the ones who went on that program so often say that was just, changed their whole experience and they loved it. And of course, you're in London and you've got all of London at your doorstep, and that's, what could be better than that? Our other FSP is in Washington, D.C., right? So that's the non-foreign foreign study program. And the setup there is a little bit different, just to give you a sense of it. The students all do about 30, 35-hour-a-week internship, usually in a government office, so either on Capitol Hill in a senator's or a member's of Congress office, or somewhere in the executive branch. It could be in the courts. It could be in a think tank, but an organization that's doing policy research. So we help them to place themselves into these internships, and they do about 4 days a week doing that. And then they also have 2 seminars that are taught by the Dartmouth faculty member who's accompanying them to DC. So they do those, one of them usually on the day that they don't go to their internship, and one of them happens in the evening. It's pretty demanding. So they get 2/3 of an academic schedule, and they're also holding down a kind of a job, 30 hours a week or so. And they're doing some writing for their internship as well. So again, it really tends to be all-consuming, but you're in DC, and there's a lot of, we make really good use of the Dartmouth alumni network in the U.S. government. And if you read the newspaper, there are some that are actually in fairly important positions, maybe more soon. We often are successful in getting folks, Dartmouth alumni, who are in DC to come and meet for special sessions or lectures with the students. It's a really great program. And that's just 2 examples. What are there, 54 altogether? Mm-hmm. There are a lot of opportunities.
So I mentioned there are 3 ways to study abroad. We talked about the language study abroad, the foreign study programs, and then your third option, if you don't want to go, I personally really loved having the Dartmouth professor there, having the other Dartmouth students, especially having never been abroad before I came to Dartmouth. It was a really nice sort of safety net and just a good structure for me. But if you don't want that, if you want to strike out on your own, you also have the option of doing an exchange or a transfer term sort of on your own. You can go through the registrar. So I have friends who have gone to Mongolia, to Australia, doing their own programs, which is an option as well, which is really great. So you have virtually unlimited options to study abroad at Dartmouth. And with the D plan, it's great because you're not gone for quite as long, and so you can study abroad up to 3 times, which is personally something that I've loved about my Dartmouth experience. So.
And even within the exchanges, there are some exchanges that that Dartmouth has specifically set up. So Keble College at Oxford in England is a Dartmouth exchange. And then there are other exchanges that, as Amanda said, are sort of independent, but lots of Dartmouth students have gone on before. So we have a colleague in the admissions office, one of our interns, who went on semester at sea last year. And there's a small group of Dartmouth students on semester at sea with this very big group of students from all around the world. So there are a bunch of different ways to do this and make it work.
And so the next question we have is, maybe for Professor Carey, as a professor here and then also as a parent now, what do you think sets Dartmouth apart from the other Ivy Leagues?
I think, size, for one thing. I think we're the smallest Ivy, is that right?
Right.
And the fact that, there are some graduate schools at Dartmouth. There's a medical school, an engineering school, a business school, and some of the departments in arts and sciences have graduate students in them, especially the ones where the faculty need to be running, say, a large lab in order to be active in research. But the vast majority of departments at the college don't have graduate students. And one of the things that means is that the teaching is done by faculty, not by graduate students. And I think that changes the experience a bit. And I think there's a case to be made for the big university model. It's the kind of place that I went to as an undergraduate, and I think it was great. But there's a real strong case to be made for the Dartmouth College model. I've taught, before I taught at Dartmouth, I taught at Washington University, and again, I don't want to get into the business of saying anything negative about WashU. It's a great place. I think they do a great job, but I have much more contact with my students, or my undergraduate students, here at Dartmouth than I did there. I know them better. I remember when I arrived thinking, wow, these students are really fantastic, and the fact is the students at WashU were also fantastic, but I know my Dartmouth students better. I read all their papers. Nobody else is grading their exams. And I spend more time with them in office hours. I spend more time with them as research assistants because, when I taught at a university, I had graduate students to be my research assistants. Turns out the undergraduates are really fantastic at that. And I spend a lot of time working with students on my own research. So inside of class, outside of class, your contact with faculty is more than it would be at any of the other Ivies.
Amanda, you're doing research with a professor this term?
I am. There's a program called the James Friedman Presidential Scholars Program that's for juniors. You do a 2-term research project either with or with a faculty member, either for pay or for class credit. And I'm working with one of Professor Carey's colleagues, Professor Deborah Brooks, working on gender and politics and appearance and research within that. So I've been doing that in the winter, and now this is my 2nd term doing it. So.
My favorite statistic, and it's not made up, it sounds like something an admissions officer would make up, but it's true, about research at Dartmouth and access to faculty is that right now at the Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center, which is a great resource for Dartmouth in terms of research and students who are interested in medicine or bio, right now at the Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center, there are more funded research positions than there are students to fill them. So that's a pretty good example. It's an extreme example, but it's a pretty good example of the dynamic that Professor Carey described in terms of access to faculty members, access to the opportunity to step into research and independent study. There are grad students here, but there aren't thousands of graduate students. It's a relatively small population.
I mean, even the professors here, as you mentioned, are really, make a lot of contact with their students. I mean, just I'm in a pretty big class this term. I have an 80 student statistics class, and that's I think the biggest class I've had at Dartmouth. But it feels like a much smaller class even because my professor literally has 8 or 9 hours of office hours a week, and he's also available by appointment if you can't make any of those. But just last night I went to Mondays at Moore, and Moore is the psychology building, and every Monday night at 7:30 he's there with animal crackers and lemonade to answer your questions, and he showed me how we're using like this new statistics program, and he literally sat down with me for 10 minutes and just showed me like, okay, here's how you open the program, and like here's how, I'm not good with computers, but like and something that he had like already we're expected to know on our own, and I still wasn't getting it, and he was really helpful, and he's there every Monday night, in addition to being there during the day all the time, available to meet with students, and I think that's a pretty common experience with professors here, which is really great. And the next question, somewhat related, is how is it adapting to the pace of Dartmouth academics?
That's for you.
Okay, great. So I was actually really nervous. I did go to private school, but I went to, this, essentially what I thought of as this, pretty random private school in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I mean, it wasn't, this fancy New England prep school where I'd been taught about the Ivy League since 5th grade, anything like that. And I was really nervous, and I definitely worked really hard my freshman fall, and it paid off. I mean, I did well, and I just didn't really know how I would stack up against other Dartmouth students, and I found that my biggest problem, just personally and as a Dartmouth student in general, is time management. And people here want to get involved in a lot of things. And this term, as I mentioned, I'm playing Frisbee. This is our main season. I'm doing research with the professor. I also tried to take 4 classes. I decided to drop, which is more than the normal 3. I lasted a week, and then I decided, no, that's too much. And I think that's one big thing is, recognizing how much is too much. And a lot of people come in freshman, fall, and not just academically, but extracurricular in general, try to do a lot of different things. But I find, one thing that's really great is, as we've already talked about, the professors here are so helpful. And if you are having trouble in a class, there's a ton of resources, and you can get a tutor through the Academic Skills Center. You can go to the Rhetoric and Writing Institute in the library, where they'll help you in a paper at any point in the writing process. So whether you just need help, really honing your argument, crafting your thesis, or whether you've already written the entire thing and you just want someone to look it over, like that's completely free to any student. There's so many, your UGA, your undergraduate advisor on your first year floor is available for you. The Dean's Office student consultants are seniors who have office hours essentially in your dorm each week. And they're also there with, animal crackers and lemonade sort of thing. Just to answer your questions, I was having trouble with a class my freshman winter and was asking, how can I do better in this class? And I went to the professor, I went to my UGA and, figured it out, ended up doing fine. Like, there's so many resources and so many people willing to help you. And I think just the fact that your professor is often the first person you turn to, whereas I feel like my friends at other schools have said, the professor is the last ditch option, where like if you've exhausted all your other resources, like then you approach the professor, but usually they're not super keen about talking to you. And here, if I have a question on the lecture, that's, I email the professor or anything like that, which I think is really helpful when it comes to adjusting to the academics. So.
We were talking a little bit before the chat about how quickly midterms can come up. How do you prepare students in the fall, new students, for that, adjusting to that pace of a 10-week term? What do you lay out for them and say, look, here are the, their benchmarks or time that you say, hey, here's when you should be thinking about whether you're in trouble or not and what's happening. How do you sort of help them look ahead towards that?
Well, in particular with classes that have a lot of freshmen in them, so I teach classes to students at all stations along the path, but especially for classes that have a lot of freshmen in them, I think it's critical to give them a lot of bites at the apple, as it were, a lot of opportunities, so they, instead of having one midterm and a final, I have 2 shorter exams and a final and 7 or 8 quizzes and a couple of short papers. So it's a lot in 10 weeks, so they're doing something all the time, but they're getting feedback constantly, and they get a sense, and the stakes are never too high on one of those things. And I think that's critical, especially freshman year. Then as you move further along and as the classes get more advanced, the stakes tend to be higher on particular assignments. But that's also because they tend to be more research oriented, they tend to be larger projects. And so even when we're doing that, I always want to have students, if they're writing a big research paper, they're going to turn in a prospectus first. That's what's the question? How am I going to address this? And they get feedback there, and then maybe a draft and feedback, and then before they turn the final thing in. So even when the stakes are high, we try to spread out both the planning and how you do the work, and also the feedback.
One thing that I think that also helps you adjust is your first year writing seminar. So this is, you take writing 5 and then your first year writing seminar in your first couple of terms, either your fall and winter or your winter and spring here at Dartmouth. So it's a class all first years are required to take. You have 16 students in the class. There's a writing TA who's an upperclassman who's been hired to TA that class because they're really good at writing. And then you have your professor. So what's really nice is, it's a small class. It's literally just focused on getting you up to speed. Obviously there's students coming in from a lot of different backgrounds at Dartmouth, and maybe some of them have been learning about the 5-paragraph essay since 6th grade, and others haven't maybe had such an extensive writing education. And so it's such a great class because you're guaranteed to have a really small class your first couple of terms on campus. The writing TA reads all of your papers before you turn them into the professor, so you're going to get feedback before you ever get a grade on it. And it's a really good, they're really helpful in getting you up to speed on that, which is really nice.
Great.
Next question, does Dartmouth have grade deflation?
Grade deflation?
Deflation.
Yeah.
Interesting. It used to. The question is usually whether we have grade inflation or not.
Right.
I don't know how to answer that question. Well, you have a perspective on that?
I've looked at some of the historical data. Yeah, there is some grade inflation, and that if you looked at Dartmouth grades 30 years ago, the average grades were a little bit lower than they are now. I'm doing my best to try to reverse that. But no, there is a little bit. I think we, of course, it's also the case that the students. If you look at the students who are getting in now, they're pretty impressive. But that's not the complete answer. We report on transcripts, both the grade in the class and the median grade in the class. So there's there's a little bit of information that helps people to get a sense of where they stand relative, not just to a letter, but relative to the rest of the pack. There is a little bit of inflation. It's no more or less than in any of the other schools around, and faculty do talk about it, occasionally, and talk about ways we might want to address that. But we haven't had a major initiative at the college to address it. I don't think it's corrupting the quality of the grading system to that level.
Yeah, one thing that I think that is nice is that professors, grade you based on how you do and not how you do in relation to your other classmates. I've heard of very few classes that are graded on a curve specifically, where people will be, graded up or down depending on how the whole class does. It's based on how you do, and if everyone in the class does really well, then everyone, gets a pretty good grade, and if everyone does poorly, hopefully the professor will do something to fix that. But
the challenges of grading on a curve is not it's not a topic here that somebody writes an editorial about every term, or I know in other institutions, particularly in the sciences, there's concern about the dynamic of grading on a curve and impact on graduate school applications. If you look at the student newspaper at Dartmouth and you look at folks who blog here, that's not a big topic of worry here, the dynamic of grading on a curve, because it's also just not it's not a common practice. Yeah.
So our next question, could you elaborate on the article recently posted in Rolling Stone magazine? What is the college doing to respond to these allegations? And in addition, why not just shut down the Greek system?
Well, why don't I'll try to give the broad view, since I've answered this question a lot and I've been involved in this conversation for a long time, and then I'm sure both Professor Carey and Amanda can talk from their own personal experiences. If you haven't read the article, I don't want to spend lots of time rehashing it, but I know we've got lots of questions about this on the chat, and we want to be sure to talk about it and address it from as many angles as we can. So I think a couple things to think about. The first thing is just to take the second part of this. What is the college doing to respond to the article, but also just issues related to this, because any residential college campus, and this is not to lessen the impact at Dartmouth, but I have worked at Dartmouth, I worked at another residential college. I used to be a high school counselor, and I counseled students who went off to hundreds of different residential colleges. we know. I know that on the chat, folks are posting references to op-eds in the newspaper and some of the other materials that are out in the media right now. So at any residential college, if you go and visit and ask questions about Greek life, hazing, alcohol, gender relations, if you get a smiley, happy answer that says, "Oh, everybody's happy here and it's great," I would, as a parent, as an educator, I would run screaming from that place. And what's always been refreshing to me about Dartmouth is that this is a place that tackles these issues head on. This is a place that talks really honestly about issues around use of alcohol on campus. We're really open and honest about that, and people talk about it. The college addresses it really directly, and probably maybe the most recent example of this is that the college is taking a leadership nationally in an organization called NCHIP, which is a collaborative of 35 to 40 different colleges and universities from around the country who are coming together to look at effective ways to talk about, address, think about the impact of alcohol use on campus, and essentially steal from one another and come up with good strategies to help us talk honestly about it and also address it proactively. DCHIP is our version of that at Dartmouth. So there's NCHIP is the national organization. DCHIP is the organization at Dartmouth that's sort of taking the lead on that. The college has over the last year been working really hard, really in response to a group of students to proactively talk about and address issues around sexual assault and issues that are linked to all of these issues that we're talking about around alcohol and hazing and all of that. So all of that's been in place before these articles came out. And then this winter, the editorial first appeared in our student newspaper, now has been picked up by Rolling Stone and other areas. And as you can tell, I think from, if you've seen the Rolling Stone article online, there are really, really thoughtful commentary, really thoughtful comments on there from members of the Dartmouth community and others. You can see in the Dartmouth student newspaper in the Dartmouth lots of commentary from the community. And what's happening in real time is that people at Dartmouth are talking about this and thinking about this. And this spring, in an extension of the work we've done around DCHIP and NCHIP, what's happening now is there's a wellness initiative in place that a group of students, staff at Dartmouth, faculty are involved in a student safety and accountability committee who are taking this work from NCHIP, this work related to alcohol, and thinking about, okay, now how do we practically head-on directly talk about hazing and address it? How do we pick up on some of the things we've already done? Our leader, the leadership in the Greek life organizations at Dartmouth, Wes Schaub, who's I guess his technical title is Director of GLOSS, which is it's our acronym for Greek life at Dartmouth. He's come to Dartmouth already with lots of experience in this area. He's sort of recognized as a national expert on this, and he's done a great job engaging students. So I think there's a lot happening on the ground here. If you visit campus as a parent, as a student, you should ask people about it. Dartmouth students are going to give you really honest answers about it, and I think there's a lot of very sort of proactive conversation happening. And to be honest, so that it's not all happy, I think there's also a lot of reactive stuff happening because of the articles. I think people are trying to figure out if we haven't done enough and done it right. So I don't know. I mean, you're the parent of a student here. You're enmeshed in it all. How would you, as concise a way as possible, talk about what people are doing right now?
Sure. I mean, I think one thing that's really great is that, you already mentioned it a lot, but students are talking about it, and obviously, this is a problem on a lot of campuses, but people at Dartmouth are aware of it, and I think people have been aware of it, but now that it's really been brought into the limelight, people are talking about it. I mean, I personally have never experienced hazing on campus. I know that it does happen. Like, it's not tucked away in a corner.
Right.
To some extent, it's tucked away in a corner, but people are talking about it and trying to because it's it's silly. It's a harmful behavior, and it's I don't. Obviously when students are making, I don't know, teenagers have been dumb for all of history, right? And they're, at some point, that happens, and it's going to happen on every campus, but it shouldn't end. I think students here, there's a lot of students who are really up in arms about it. And, I think the other thing in relation to the Greek system, unfortunately, I think the Greek system is getting painted in this completely negative light. And there's certainly, just as with any institution, whether it's Dartmouth's Greek system, whether it's Dartmouth or universities in general, there are always going to be negative aspects. I think no place is perfect, and there are maybe not perfect things about the Dartmouth Greek system, to be sure, but it's not just this negative system. I mean, I personally have chosen not to be affiliated, but I have a lot of friends who have had really incredible experiences, people who have made, really, really strong bonds with people, who have met, great people they never would have met, that sort of thing. I mean, it sounds silly, but my freshman roommate is actually a really great example in that she was on the varsity lacrosse team. We had, very different social groups our freshman year, and then actually she joined the same sorority that a lot of the Frisbee girls joined my sophomore year. And we've actually become better friends since, after we stopped living together freshman year, because she met so many of the people that I was already friends with, and I met a lot of people that she was already friends with through her sorority, and, really strengthened those networks. And so now actually, we hang out more than we did freshman year when we were living together, which sounds really silly, but, they actually do, I think, bring a lot of people together who might not meet otherwise on campus. And I think another important part of that is, with the D plan, with being off so much, it's a really, for a lot of students, they've found, I have a team, I have, my sort of own social networks, but for some students who maybe don't have a team or the outing club or something like that, it's just a really nice, people don't join it to, binge drink all the time. They join it to make friends and to make great social networks and to, really have a place to come home to when they get back to campus, which I think is a really good and important part of the Greek system here. So.
I'll just weigh in briefly. As a parent, my son is a freshman, so he hasn't confronted this question yet of whether to get involved in the Greek system or not. I read the article. It's worrisome, but I don't. We're sorting out what in there is accurate and what in there is problematic, and trying to address the problems. But as a faculty member, my interaction with the Greek system has been completely different. Just to say, the Greek houses themselves, they vary a lot in what their focus is and what the nature of their community is. Some of them are, I think, more socially oriented. Some of them are service oriented. Some of them are academically oriented. My main interaction with the system has been really two ways. One is I've gone to a lot of Greek houses. A lot of times they'll organize a dinner once a term and invite a faculty member and have. I've gone to speak about my research. This isn't probably the image you have of a Dartmouth fraternity house, but I've gone and spoken about my research to a bunch of students over dinner at a Greek house, and it's. I'm always happy when someone wants to hear about my work. So that, but I think it's been a really great way for me to get a little bit of a window into the residential life of the students, and also to have a conversation that we might not have time to have in class. So that's been one thing. And the other way that I've interacted with the Greek system is, when my kids were younger, I was coaching their Little League teams and their youth hockey teams in town, and I have had students from the fraternities, only fraternities because I have boys, but not sororities, who've come and helped out coaching. And actually one year when the kids got a little bit older, there was a team of 3 fraternity brothers from one house that took over the whole coaching for the team. I think it was probably the season in baseball that my son liked the most, because it was the one I wasn't coaching him. But it was really fantastic. So there are a lot of faces to the Greek system. I don't want to put too much of a gloss on it. I think there are problems with some elements of it, but there's a lot more to it than what's visible, certainly in the Rolling Stone article.
Mm-hmm. Great. So the next question is just a bit of a topic switch, but with the D plan and off terms, what research opportunities are available, and how easy is it to get internships? Okay.
Well,
I can say something.
You want to go ahead? You start now.
Really easy. I think it's really great. I have a really great example, actually. One of my friends was applying for a State Department internship and found the State Department person actually came to talk to Dartmouth students through Career Services, and the woman mentioned that for their summer internships, there are positions offered to 1 out of every 11 or 12 applicants. And for their spring internships, which actually coincide with our winter term normally, positions get offered to 1 out of every 2 or 3 applicants. And so just the fact that you're applying for a lot of these things, if you take off your junior fall or your junior winter, are probably the 2 most popular times for people to take off and do that sort of internship term. You're applying at a time when everyone else is in school, and you have a much better chance of getting that really great internship, with the State Department, with that company you've always wanted to work for, because of everyone else is in school and you have that free time to be able to devote to that. And research opportunities, as that goes, both even when you're taking classes doing part-time research, there's a ton of opportunities, whether it's through a structured program like Presidential Scholars, or just by asking a professor, hey, I'm interested in what we were talking about in class today. I know you're working on that, do you need any help? Like, I'd love to talk more with that about you. I'd love to work with you, unstructured opportunities like that. And then, in addition, I know I have a lot of friends who have done research on campus as a full-time job for a summer or for an off term. It's called a Hanover FSP, a Hanover Foreign Study Program. But I actually did that last term because I'd been gone in the fall. I wanted to be back here on campus. I worked full-time in admissions, but I have a lot of friends who have done, full-time research with professors. One of my good friends actually has worked in the same lab since his sophomore fall. He's spent 2 terms doing full-time research with it, and actually is going to be here for a post-grad year doing full-time in that lab for an entire year after he graduates this spring. So a lot of research opportunities on campus, and internship opportunities off campus for sure with the D-Plan.
I never trust rankings, but on some aspect of the U.S. News and World Report rankings last year, Dartmouth ranked number 2 in the country in the percentage of undergraduates who have paid internships during their undergraduate career. And the number 1 school was a school in Washington, physically in Washington, D.C. So it must be working. Again, don't trust rankings, but if we've got that many students placed into paid internships during their undergraduate career, we're in really good shape.
Great. 15th question from Dana. Do students ever get bored being in such an isolated area? No. My view of it has always been kind of, if you put 4,000 18 to 23-year-olds in one place, no matter where it is, they're not going to get bored. But I think a really good example comes from my first year floor. There were about half of my floor actually was from the New York area, just kind of ended up that way. And from the very beginning of freshman year, they were like, oh, we'll all go stay at Whitney's apartment. Like, we're going to, go to New York for a weekend. Like, everyone can come. It'll be great. And we kept talking about the trip all of freshman year, and we never made it down. Not because New York isn't accessible. I mean, there's a bus leaving twice a day from, right on campus, and we very easily could have gone. But every single weekend, someone was like, oh, no, I have a game this weekend I want you all to come see. Or, oh, no, there's a really cool show at the Hop playing. Or, oh, no, there's an awesome, it's Winter Carnival, and it's a 99-cent ski day, ski day at the skiway. Like, every single weekend, something came up, and we never made it our entire freshman year. And I think that's, definitely, it's easy to get to Boston or New York or something, but a lot of times people come in, saying, oh, I'm a city girl, I'm a city boy, I'm going to go back at least once or twice a term. I just need New York, but then they end up, not leaving because you leave for a weekend, you come back and you missed out on so much. I've never gotten bored in Hanover. I think both on campus and off, too. I mean, coming from the South, I was a little nervous about New England, but I absolutely love it, especially in the summer here. There's so many cool places to drive to, to go swimming, or you can drive to the Moose Locker Bean Lodge, and students are always working there, and we'll serve you this nice dinner, and you can, go hiking. There's so many cool things to do out, in the area, even though we're not in a big city. And then obviously on campus, there's always stuff going on. So
great.
And then our next question: can you discuss travel? How do students get to and from the airport, and can students have their cars on campus during their first year?
So I'll give the basic background answers. Students don't have cars on campus during their first year unless there's some unusual reason to request it. And frankly, you don't need a car on campus. Most of the students I know who have cars on campus leave it in one place all week long. Maybe they'll go grab it on the weekend to run errands with friends, or West Lebanon, which is a town about 10 minutes away, run errands over there or go out to dinner or something. But you don't need a car. A lot of students who fly in and out of Boston and take the Dartmouth coach back and forth. So the bus that Amanda mentioned that comes right onto campus, there's buses down to New York City, there's buses down to Boston. The Dartmouth coach is really easy. They show a movie, they give you a free bottle of water. Well, not free because you've paid for your ticket, but they give you water when you come on. It's all easy. So coming in and out of Logan's...
Wi-Fi.
Yeah, and Wi-Fi, that's right. So you can, I always work on the bus, so that's easy. Flying in and out of Manchester is also pretty convenient. I actually find going to the West Coast that Manchester's cheaper, but the problem with Manchester is that there's maybe 3 or 4, 5 round-trip buses a day as opposed to Boston where there are more. So if you come into Manchester, you have to plan it a little bit more and hit the bus right. Where with Logan, you can sort of know, oh, if I get in at 9, I can catch this next bus. If I miss it, I'll get one 45 minutes later. But it's pretty. We're pretty conveniently located in terms of the interstate coming up generally from the south, from Boston, from the southeast, and the interstate coming up from Hartford and New York. They meet 10 minutes away from us. So it's pretty easy to get in and out. I mean, I don't know, your first time in, did you feel like you were I mean, it was hard to figure out. And
yeah.
no.
My family drove me up at the beginning of freshman fall just to bring up all my stuff and take a little family road trip to college. But after that, I've always flown. I fly directly from Boston to Atlanta. It's a really easy flight, and then when I get up here to Boston, I do the round. What's nice also is that the round trip coach ticket lasts for a year.
Right.
So if I'm flying up at the beginning, because it's cheaper to buy the round trip ticket than the single. So if I'm coming up at the beginning of the term, I can buy the round trip ticket and use it at the end of the term, at 2 terms later, whenever. So it's always been very convenient for me, which is nice. And then the next question, let's talk about academics. How easy is it to double major? In addition, a little bit about the pre-health track.
I can talk about double majoring, I guess,
great.
and then I'm going to hand it off to someone to talk about the pre-health track.
Sure.
Boy, do you guys know what the percentage of students here that double, 30% double
40%.
major? 40%?
No, the double major is about 20 to 25%. It's a pretty significant part of the population.
And then
but then if you add in modifying
Okay.
majors and minoring, there's lots of combinations and majority of students.
Yeah, it's incredibly common. And I say this because this is, for whatever reason, this past week has been a period in the term when a lot of students were adjusting their majors, and I've been signing a lot of major cards this week and talking with students about their plan, what changes are they making, and so forth. I guess your average, so you're here, you 3 times, how many classes do you take? 36 classes.
35 to graduate.
The major, most majors are in the neighborhood of 10, 11, 12 classes. And then, of course, there are some distributive requirements that you take as well. But a lot of students end up managing to double major, and you can do that if you have a plan relatively early and you choose your classes carefully. It's a really common thing to do. If you don't do that, there's still all kinds of ways of taking advantage of the curriculum of other departments, even if you're not majoring in them. And you've got enough flexibility beyond those 12 classes you might take for your major to really sample quite a wide range of things.
I always tell students that by the time you graduate from Dartmouth, you're required to take 35 classes. A lot of students take 36 or 37 by the time they graduate. Yeah. So if an average major has about 11 classes or 12 classes in the major, across the curriculum, Dartmouth has distributive requirements. So you can look at our website and get details on that. But for most students outside of their major, the distributive requirements add up to as few as 8, as many as 11 or 12 classes. So let's go to the high side. Let's say you've got 11 or 12 classes in your major, 10, 11 or 12 classes in distributive requirements outside of your major. So now you're at 22, 23 classes. You're going to take 35 by the time you graduate. So you've got a lot of flexibility there to make changes as you go along, to double major, do a major and a minor, do a modified major, which is like combining 2 departments in an interdisciplinary way and having a major and a minor that are connected, to decide to be pre-med or pre-health, but major in government. You've got flexibility to make that happen. You declare your major in your sophomore year. Lots of students make changes as they go along and come back to Professor Carey and say, hey, I was a government major, but now I'm going to be a government major with an econ minor, and you need to sign this. And you've got the room to be able to make those changes as you go along. And pre-med in particular, any college or university you go to in the United States, the pre-med course requirements are set by the American Medical Association and basically add up to 10, 11, 12, 13 classes depending on the kind of med school you're applying to. So again, if you're a biochem major, there's lots of overlap with the pre-med requirements. You're going to be able to make that work. But if you're an engineering major, which is a really popular combination with pre-med at Dartmouth, you can do engineering, you can be pre-med, and you can make that work. And about 55, 60% of pre-med students at Dartmouth study abroad, compared to about 60 to 63% overall. So you've got lots of opportunity to be pre-med and make those other pieces work and add that in. So there's enough flexibility here in the curriculum to make those choices. You declare your major middle of sophomore year, 5th academic term, and then most students I know, if they don't wholesale change their major, they make some kind of tweaks as they go along.
Yeah.
Adding a double major, taking it away, putting a minor in, modifying their major, and that's you've got lots of opportunity there to make those changes.
And as far as I'm aware, we do have the highest rate of double majoring in the Ivy League.
I think that's true. Yeah.
One reason for that, someone actually figured out the math for me, and I was like, oh, that makes so much sense, because you think about we're taking 3 classes a term here, and that actually seems like, oh, you're not taking as many classes, but because you're taking 3 classes a term over 12 quarters, you have 36 classes. You only need 35 to graduate, but most people will take 36. At a semester school where you're taking 4 classes a term and you have 8 semesters, you're only taking 32.
Right.
And the extra 4 classes, that's almost half of a major.
Yeah.
So it actually is really a lot easier. You know, you have that 4 classes of wiggle room that actually does make it a lot easier for a lot of students to, you know, add another minor, because, you know, if your minor is 6 or 7 classes, you've almost got a minor right there, or, you know, to add a double major, something like that. Next question, real quick before we wrap up. How is dining on campus, and what if you have a dietary restriction? Well, I can answer. I have been a vegetarian since my senior year of high school, so I've never eaten meat at Dartmouth, and I've never had a problem. I've heard that the meat is great, but I personally enjoy the vegetarian options really a lot. They have kosher and halal options as well. One of my best friends is gluten-free and, you know, has a good time in the dining hall as well. There's never really a problem. I think one thing that's really nice about dining at Dartmouth is there's a lot of options for students. I've been here for 3 years and I haven't gotten bored of the food. I think that's a good sign. I still, you know, really like the dining halls. And one thing that's really nice is that Dartmouth Dining Services does employ a full-time nutritionist, and she has office hours for students, you know, if they want to talk about, you know, a dietary restriction, if they're worried about getting what they need out of the dining halls. They have office hours every week with the nutritionist for that, and students can come in and, you know, talk about issues with that, talk about, you know, healthy eating in the dining halls, anything like that, that they're available for students. So it's really nice. And then our last question, is it true that Dartmouth stands out as the most collaborative Ivy? What makes Dartmouth stand out, or why Dartmouth?
Who wants to take it on first?
The most collaborative Ivy. I guess, I mean, I don't want to do a rerun here because I've talked about it a little bit before, but in terms of, you know, as a faculty member collaborating with my students, I think there's more of that than, and I've got a lot of colleagues at a lot of the other Ivies, and I'm in communications with them all the time. In terms of collaboration with my undergraduate students, no question, it's the most. If that's what we're talking about, it's the smallest, and so I guess in some sense the community is going to be a little bit more personalized, even outside of the classroom as well. So in those 2 ways, yeah, sure, I'd say that Dartmouth's the most collaborative Ivy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one thing that's really great is that, you know, I've heard horror stories of friends at other schools that won't be named of, you know, people checking all the books out of the library the night before the test, like not to read them, just so that no one else could read them, or, you know, tearing the page out of the book, like really crazy, like just crazy stuff to me, like that I would never think would happen and wouldn't happen here. I think one thing that's really great is Dartmouth students are always willing to help each other out. Like I definitely think it's a really collaborative place. Like I haven't been to the 7 other Ivies. I can't say if they're the most collaborative, but my experience has been, you know, all the classes have email lists that you can access, you know, through your Blackboard, anything like that. And you just go on and you email it to the class. And even if you don't know anyone, you say, you know, like, hey, I missed class because I had a tournament, or, you know, I was sick. Can someone send me the notes? And I've blitzed out to or emailed out to a class of, you know, 25 students and gotten 5 responses from people I didn't know within a day, you know, offering me my notes. And a lot of times it ends up like working out better for me to miss class, because then I end up with a better set of notes than if I had gotten there. And people are always willing to help each other out, as, you know, obviously with friends, but, you know, even with, people you've never met in your classes, just there's always study groups going on, you know, people email out like last minute questions before the test, things like that, and definitely a really great place to study in that sort of way.
I think the why Dartmouth, you know, I'm obviously incredibly biased because I went here. I chose to come back here and work here. And there are things, you know, there's a lot that stands out about the place, but just a couple of things that I would say, you know, Amanda talked about that sort of connection, supporting one another. Being in a college town creates this environment where you are inevitably going to meet a broader range of students than you might in a different kind of environment. Students, Amanda talked about not wanting to leave campus, you know, not wanting to go away for a weekend because you don't want to miss anything. This is an incredibly active place. You're connected to a really incredibly broad range of students. And when I think, I'm old, I graduated from Dartmouth a long time ago, and I think about where my friends are in the world now, from a friend who's the director of an emergency medical clinic in Nevada near Lake Tahoe, to a film director who lives between Vermont and LA and travels and directs films, two of my closest friends at Dartmouth, to a couple friends who are surgeons in the Twin Cities area, a friend who ran one of the world's largest tech venture funds for 20 years before he retired and then took over a different company and started over again. That's a group of 5, 6, 7 people who are all incredibly good friends with one another and all sort of went different directions professionally, but share this experience in common. And you're going to be exposed to an incredibly broad range of people here because of being at a place that attracts students from so many different directions and then puts them down in a college town where you can't help but interact with one another and be a part of each other's lives.
Yeah, I think one thing that was really great sophomore summer for me was, I didn't want to go to too small of a school. I went to a pretty small high school and didn't really want everybody to know everything about me when I went to college. But Dartmouth was the perfect size because, it was not too big, not too small, but sophomore summer it went from 4,400 students to 1,000 students, and it was so cool getting to meet so many people in my class because I either met people who I'd never even seen before, or I got to know people who I'd always known tangentially, a friend of a friend, or another geography major who was in a lot of my classes, but never actually gotten to know. And then this summer, with just having so many fewer people on campus, it was an amazing opportunity to get to know people really well. And I made some really great friends that summer that I've carried on through. And the people at Dartmouth are so great. I mean, the professors are wonderful. The study abroad options are great. But for me, the reason why I chose Dartmouth and the reason why I love it so much is the community of students and faculty here is just so incredible, and you get to really be involved in that community. You'd have to try really hard to not be involved in the community here. And the students come from such a different range of backgrounds, and there's so much to learn, not just in your classes, but from each other. And whether it's, actual help on a class or just, learning something about your friend's gap year trip to the Himalayas that you never, would have learned about before. And I think that's why Dartmouth, I guess. So thank you, Professor Carey and Mr. Parrish, for joining us for this edition of Dartmouth Direct Live. And thank you, parents, for joining us and sharing your questions with us. We hope we answered as many of them as possible. If you still have questions, you can visit the Dartmouth Admissions website, which is dartmouth.edu/admissions, as well as Dartmouth Direct. There's student blogs, there's videos, all sorts of things available on that website to help you answer those questions that we didn't have time for tonight. We encourage admitted students to tune in this Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where admissions interns will be answering their questions live. So have a nice evening, and thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.